Welcome, dear friends, as I unfold a gripping tale of tragedy, sacrifice, and the miraculous power of love to mend broken hearts and weave together an unexpected family from the threads of sorrow. Enjoy the story. The bright lights of the operating room glinted off the scalpel as Sarah Jones, 35, made the first incision. Her green eyes laser-focused behind her surgical mask, the raven-haired beauty was in her element. As one of Memorial Hospital's top surgeons, this is where Sarah thrived, saving lives. "Suction," she commanded, her mellifluous voice barely betraying the intensity of the moment. This was a dance she knew well, having dedicated the last decade of her life to the unforgiving world of emergency surgery. Her best friend Amanda often marveled at Sarah's unshakable composure and stamina. "I don't know how you do it, Sarah," Amanda would say, shaking her head. "The long hours, the stress, the literal life and death stakes. I'd be a basket case." Sarah would just smile enigmatically. Surgery was her calling, simple as that. It was in her blood. Even as a young girl growing up in rural Indiana, Sarah was fascinated by the world of medicine. While other little girls were playing with dolls, she could often be found by her grandmother Miriam's side, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. Miriam was a striking woman, all high cheekbones and regal bearing. The townspeople spoke of her reverently, seeking her out for her vast knowledge of natural remedies passed down through generations. "You have the healing touch, just like me," Miriam would say, tucking an errant strand of Sarah's hair behind her ear. They would spend hours poring over Miriam's ancient texts on herbal medicine, the pungent smell of the dried leaves and flowers filling the air. Sarah hung on her grandmother's every word, emerald eyes wide with wonder. She knew even then that she was destined to be a healer. Fast forward 15 years, and Sarah was blazing through her surgical residency at St. Luke's Hospital. Her talent in the operating room was undeniable. "That girl's got hands of gold," her attending physician would marvel. It was during a routine appendectomy that Sarah first laid eyes on Victor Novak. As the handsome patient was wheeled into the OR, Sarah felt her heart inexplicably flutter. "Who's the hunk?" whispered her fellow resident Jenna, waggling her eyebrows suggestively. Sarah just rolled her eyes and began prepping for the procedure. There was no room for distraction when a life was on the line. But later, as Sarah did her rounds, she found herself lingering in Victor's room. His blue eyes sparkled as he smiled up at her from the hospital bed. "My hero," he said, his voice husky. "How can I ever repay you?" Sarah blushed, uncharacteristically tongue-tied. There was an instant connection, an undeniable pull between them. Over the next few weeks of Victor's recovery, they grew closer, bonding over their shared love of 80s rock ballads and greasy diner food. Victor, it turned out, was a rising star in the tech world. At 27, the sandy-haired wunderkind had already made his first million with a revolutionary app that was the talk of Silicon Valley. Sarah was dazzled by his ambition and his brilliant mind. Before long, the two were inseparable. Within a year, they were married in a fairy tale ceremony at a picturesque vineyard. Sarah thought her heart might burst with happiness. She had found her soulmate, her partner in life. The future stretched before them, glittering with promise. But reality soon set in, casting a pall over their marital bliss. As Victor's company skyrocketed to dizzying heights of success, he was increasingly consumed by work. Days stretched into weeks where Sarah barely saw her husband, his side of the bed cold and empty. "I'm sorry, baby," Victor would say, his voice tinny through the phone as Sarah ate another solitary dinner. "I'll make it up to you, I promise. This deal is just too important." Sarah tried to be understanding. She really did. She was proud of Victor's success and didn't want to stand in the way of his dreams. But with every missed anniversary, every canceled vacation, every night spent alone, she felt her resentment growing. They had always talked about starting a family, but Victor kept putting it off, claiming he wasn't ready. "Next year," he would say with a reassuring smile, "once things settle down at work." But things never did settle down. Sarah threw herself into her work, finding solace in the rhythms of the operating room. If she couldn't control her crumbling marriage, At least she could still save lives. But even that was cold comfort in the face of her growing loneliness and despair. The call came on a balmy Tuesday evening. Sarah was just scrubbing out of a particularly grueling surgery when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Frowning, she picked up. "Is this Sarah Novak?" a somber voice asked. "Yes," Sarah said slowly, her heart starting to race. "Who is this?" "This is Detective Hansen with the Coast Guard. I'm sorry to inform you that there's been an accident." The world tilted on its axis as the detective explained that Victor had been on a boating excursion with some potential investors when a freak storm hit. The boat had capsized in the churning waves. Despite being a strong swimmer, Victor had drowned before rescuers could reach him. Sarah felt the phone slip from her numb fingers, clattering to the floor. This couldn't be happening. Just last night she had left an angry voicemail on Victor's phone about another missed dinner date. And now? He was gone? Forever? The next few days passed in a blur of grief and shock. Sarah moved through the funeral preparations like a zombie, unable to comprehend the finality of it all. She kept expecting Victor to walk through the door, that boyish grin on his face. "Just kidding, baby. I'm here now." But he never did. Sarah found herself standing by his graveside, clutching a single red rose as the casket was lowered into the ground. She felt something inside her wither and die, like the final fragile flame of hope had been snuffed out. How was she supposed to go on without the love of her life? The days bled into weeks, into months, into years. Sarah threw herself into her work with a manic intensity, as if she could somehow outrun her grief. She was a machine in the operating room, performing one flawless surgery after another. But the emptiness inside her remained, a yawning chasm that threatened to swallow her whole. She hadn't so much as looked at another man since Victor died, the very thought feeling like a betrayal. Every year on the anniversary of his death, Sarah made the pilgrimage to Victor's grave. She would sit by the polished headstone for hours, tracing the letters of his name with her fingertip as silent tears streamed down her face. "I miss you so much," she would whisper to the uncaring granite. "Why did you leave me? We were supposed to have a lifetime together." But the headstone remained impassive, offering no answers, no comfort. Sarah felt like she was drowning in her own sorrow, unable to break the surface. Would this pain ever end? 3 years to the day since Victor's death, Sarah once again found herself at Eternal Oak Cemetery where he was buried. But this time was different. She had a medical conference to attend and wouldn't be able to do her usual cleaning of Victor's gravesite. Spotting the elderly groundskeeper Michael trimming a nearby hedge, Sarah approached him with a hesitant smile. Michael had always been kind to her on her visits, offering a sympathetic ear and a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Michael," she said softly, "I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a bind. I won't be able to tidy up Victor's grave this time because of work. Do you know anyone who might be able to do it? I can pay, of course." Michael leaned on his rake, his lined face creasing into a thoughtful frown. "Well now, let me think. There's a young fella been hanging around lately doing odd jobs. Name's Frank. A bit rough around the edges, but a good lad, really. I'm sure he'd be happy to help out." Sarah bit her lip, torn. She hated the thought of a stranger touching Victor's grave. But what choice did she have? "Okay," she said finally. "If you think he's trustworthy, I suppose it's all right. How much should I pay him?" Michael waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, I doubt he'll ask for much. Poor boy seems down on his luck. Just give him whatever you think is fair." Sarah nodded, reaching into her purse and pulling out a few crisp bills. "Please tell him to do a thorough job. It means a lot to me." Michael's eyes softened with understanding as he took the money. "I'll make sure he does right by you and your Victor, miss. Don't you worry none." With a final grateful smile, Sarah turned to leave, her heart heavy. It felt strange to entrust this sacred task to someone else, but she had no choice. She could only hope this frank person would treat Victor's resting place with the respect it deserved. A week later, Sarah returned from her conference, exhausted but eager to visit Victor's grave. As she approached the familiar plot, her heart sank. The headstone was still covered in a layer of grime, dead leaves scattered across the untended grass. It was clear Frank had not upheld his end of the bargain. Hot anger surged through Sarah's veins, mixing with the bitter sting of betrayal. How dare he take her money and then just blow off the job? Did he have no respect for the dead? For her grief? Spotting Michael across the cemetery, Sarah stormed over to him, her green eyes flashing with fury. "I thought you said this Frank person was trustworthy," she snapped, her voice shaking. "Victor's grave looks like it hasn't been touched." Michael blinked at her, taken aback by her uncharacteristic outburst. "Miss Sarah, I don't know what to say. Frank assured me he would take care of it. Let me go find him and see what happened." Sarah crossed her arms over her chest, trying to rein in her temper. She knew it wasn't Michael's fault, not really. But the thought of that lowlife Frank pocketing her cash and then just bailing? It made her see red. A few minutes later, Michael returned, his weathered face grave. "I'm afraid there's been an incident, Miss Frank. He's been in an accident." Sarah stared at Michael, her anger draining away as quickly as it had come. "An accident? What happened? Is he all right?" Michael sighed heavily, taking off his cap and running a hand over his sparse gray hair. "I'm afraid not, miss. From what I gathered, Frank was on his way here to tend to your Victor's grave when he saw a young girl run out into the street, right into the path of an oncoming truck." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in horror. Michael continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "Frank didn't hesitate. He ran out and pushed the girl out of the way, taking the full brunt of the impact himself. It's a miracle he survived at all. He's in the hospital now, in a coma." Tears pricked at the corners of Sarah's eyes as the magnitude of what had happened sank in. Frank, the man she had so quickly judged and condemned, had sacrificed himself to save a child. And here she was, ready to rip him a new one over some stupid leaves on a grave. Shame washed over Sarah in sickening waves. What kind of person was she, to value some dirt and grass over a human life? Victor would be appalled if he could see her now. "What hospital is he at?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to see him. I need to apologize." Michael told her where to find Frank, and Sarah set off at once, her heart lodged firmly in her throat. She didn't know if Frank would ever wake up, if she would get the chance to tell him how sorry she was for misjudging him so badly. All she knew was that she had to try. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the sterile hospital room, as Sarah sat by Frank's bedside, watching the slow rise and fall of his bandaged chest. He looked so young, so vulnerable lying there amidst the tangle of tubes and wires. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she thought about the incredible sacrifice he had made. A soft knock at the door startled Sarah from her thoughts. She turned to see a young girl peeking in, her big blue eyes wide and uncertain. "Excuse me," the girl said shyly. "Are you Mr. Frank's wife?" Sarah blinked in surprise, shaking her head. "No, sweetie, I'm just a friend. Who are you?" The girl stepped into the room, twisting her hands nervously. "I'm Lena, the girl Mr. Frank saved." Her chin trembled as her eyes filled with tears. "It's all my fault he's hurt. I wasn't looking where I was going and—" Sarah's heart broke at the sight of Lena's distress. She quickly crossed the room and gathered the girl into a hug, stroking her hair soothingly. "Shh, it's okay. It was an accident. Frank did what he did because he's a hero. He wouldn't want you blaming yourself." As Sarah held Lena, something stirred deep inside her, a long-forgotten feeling of protectiveness and warmth. She thought back to all those years ago, when she and Victor had dreamed of starting a family of their own. That dream had died along with Victor, or so Sarah had thought. But now... Sarah gently pulled back, looking into Lena's tear-stained face. "Lena, sweetie, do you have somewhere to go? Someone to look after you?" Lena shook her head miserably. "I live in a group home. I don't have any family." In that moment, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of her life. "How would you like to come stay with me for a while? I have a big house with plenty of room. We could look after each other." Lena's eyes widened with a tentative hope. "Really? You'd want me?" Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Lena's face. "More than anything. We could be our own little family. You, me, and Frank, when he wakes up." "And he would wake up?" Sarah vowed silently. She would make sure of it. For weeks, Sarah divided her time between the hospital and navigating the Byzantine labyrinth of the foster care system. It wasn't easy convincing the powers that be that a single workaholic surgeon was fit to care for a child, but Sarah was nothing if not tenacious. Finally, after jumping through countless bureaucratic hoops, Sarah was able to bring Lena home, on the same day that Frank miraculously emerged from his coma. Sarah was at his bedside when it happened, holding his hand and talking to him softly as had become her habit. She froze when she felt his fingers twitch against hers. Hardly daring to breathe, she watched as Frank's eyes fluttered open, blinking confusedly at the harsh fluorescent lights. "Hey there, hero," Sarah whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Welcome back." Frank's gaze focused on her, a weak smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Did she make it? The little girl?" Sarah nodded, squeezing his hand. "She's just fine, thanks to you. In fact," she turned to the doorway where Lena was hovering shyly, "there's someone here who wants to thank you in person." At the sight of Lena, alive and well, Frank began to weep with joy, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Sarah and Lena quickly moved to embrace him, the three of them clinging to each other as if they were the only people in the world. In that moment, Sarah felt something click into place, like a key turning in a long-locked door. This was her family. This was her future. And for the first time since Victor died, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of her once empty guest room, a contented smile on her face. The room had been transformed into a cozy haven for Lena, complete with soft yellow walls, a fluffy white comforter, and a veritable mountain of stuffed animals. Lena was perched on the bed, her nose buried in a book, while Frank sat in a comfortable armchair by the window, engrossed in a novel of his own. The sight of them, so happy and at peace, filled Sarah with a sense of warmth and belonging. It hadn't been an easy road getting here. Frank's recovery had been long and arduous, but Sarah had been there every step of the way, offering support and encouragement as a loyal friend. When Frank was released from the hospital, Sarah hadn't hesitated to offer him a place to stay while he got back on his feet. Some of her friends and colleagues had raised eyebrows at the arrangement, but Sarah paid them no mind. Frank was family now, just like Lena. Blood didn't define family. Love did. As if sensing her presence, Lena looked up from her book, a bright smile lighting up her face. "Sarah, you're home!" She bounded off the bed and threw her arms around Sarah's waist in a tight hug. Sarah laughed, returning the embrace and dropping a kiss on top of Lena's head. "Hey, sweetie, how was your day?" As Lena chattered excitedly about her latest art project, Frank set his book aside and rose to greet Sarah with a friendly smile. "Welcome home," he said warmly. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of starting dinner. Lasagna sound okay?" Sarah grinned, giving Frank's arm a grateful squeeze. "Sounds perfect. You're a lifesaver, Frank." The three of them made their way to the kitchen, falling into the easy rhythm of setting the table and finishing up dinner preparations. As they worked, Sarah marveled at how natural it all felt, how right. This was her family, brought together not by blood, but by the unbreakable bonds of shared trauma, sacrifice, and love. Lena, the bright, resilient girl who had captured Sarah's heart from the very start. And Frank, the brave, selfless man who had become Sarah's rock, her best friend, her partner in this unexpected journey of healing and growth. As they sat down to eat, Lena said grace, her small voice filled with the pure, uncomplicated love of a child. "Thank you, God, for my new family, for Sarah and Frank and all the love they give me. Amen." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, her heart too full for words. She reached out to take Lena and Frank's hands in her own, giving them each a gentle squeeze. No, it wasn't the family she had once imagined for herself. There was still an ache in her heart for Victor, for the future they had dreamed of together. But Sarah knew that he would be happy for her, that he would want her to find joy and love again. And she had. In this little patchwork family of hers, Sarah had found a reason to smile again, to hope again. She had found home,